Mark woke up to the gentle glow of the morning sun spilling through his bedroom window, casting warm rays across the bedroom walls. He stretched his arms overhead, letting out a satisfying yawn. Mornings like this filled him with optimism and hope. A beautiful, bright day awaited, full of possibilities. He could already picture himself sipping a steaming cup of his favorite coffee while reveling in the natural beauty of his garden, which he had cherished and nurtured for years. Mark loved his garden. It wasn't just a plot of land, it was a testament to his hard work and dedication. The soft soil was adorned with colorful flowers that danced with the breeze, and rows of vegetables promised delicious meals ahead. He had spent countless weekends planting seeds, watering the plants, and chatting with the birds that often visited. Today he planned to enjoy every single moment in that beloved space. Once he made his way into the kitchen, he set the kettle on the stove for a fresh brew. The rich aroma of coffee beans filled the air, pulling him deeper into the cozy morning vibe. As he waited for the kettle, he glanced out the window, taking in the sight of his garden, glistening with dew in the early light. The vibrant greens and bursts of color invited him like an open book ready to be explored. Finally, the kettle began to whistle, breaking the stillness of the morning, and Mark hurriedly prepared his coffee. After pouring it into his favorite mug, adorned with a cheerful sunflower design, he stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. It was exactly the moment he had envisioned, a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But as he crossed the threshold into his backyard, his heart sank. A brand new wooden fence had been erected, cutting through his cherished garden like a knife. Tall and imposing, the fence seemed to loom over him, casting a shadow on the beauty he held dear. At first, Mark stood frozen in place, processing the sight before him, convinced that he was dreaming or perhaps still in the throes of a sleep-induced haze. But as he blinked, the fence remained sturdy and unyielding. "What in the world?" he exclaimed, his voice thick with disbelief. The fence didn't just block his view, it intruded upon his property, slicing through the rows of colorful flowers he had planted with such love and care. His cherished tomato plants, the pride of his garden, stood helplessly on the wrong side of this wooden barrier, deprived of the sunlight they craved. A flood of emotions surged through him: confusion, anger, frustration. Who put up this fence without asking? What gave them the right? He looked around, hoping to see someone, perhaps a neighbor, friend, or even a worker who might be able to explain what had happened. But there was no one around. The peace of the morning had been replaced by an unsettling silence. Mark approached the fence, taking in its details. The wood was fresh, the nails still gleaming, and the craftsmanship suggested that it had been built with care. But whose care? He ran his fingers along the rough surface, trying to process the reality of this unexpected invasion. The sight of the fence sliced through his thoughts, each question ringing louder than the last. How could someone do this? Why would they not speak to him first? He turned back to his garden, now marred by this sudden barrier. His heart ached for the countless hours he had spent cultivating this space, the patience he had mustered while waiting for plants to bloom, the joy he felt watching them grow. The fence interrupted not just the view but also the connection he had with nature. Without hesitation, he marched back toward his house, determined to figure out who was behind this unexpected divide. Once inside, Mark grabbed a notebook and began sketching out the layout of his property. He remembered the last time he had checked the boundaries, making a mental note of the specifications. By measuring out the fence, he hoped to determine just how much of his garden had been encroached upon. He started feeling a mix of anxiety and resolve. He wanted to know who was responsible for this and confront them directly, but first, he needed more information. Drawing up the layout made him more aware of the stakes involved. He considered speaking to neighbors to see if anyone had noticed anyone building the fence. Perhaps it was a case of mistaken boundaries? Maybe someone had miscalculated? It was hard to imagine anyone would deliberately disrupt the peace of his slice of paradise, but who could really know until he gathered more information? Taking a deep breath, Mark realized that this was not just a simple nuisance. It was an invasion of his space, a space he had poured his heart into. It was time to become an advocate for his garden, to stand up for what was right. Armed with determination and with his coffee now cold on the counter, Mark stepped outside once more, fueled by a growing sense of purpose. He was ready to take the necessary steps to reclaim his garden, to uncover the truth, and to restore the peace that had once filled his backyard. He set out to knock on his neighbors' doors, gathering their perspectives and insights. Though apprehensive, he knew he needed to speak up and understand why that fence had suddenly appeared in his life. As he walked through his neighborhood, his heart raced. Every door he knocked on brought its own story, Some neighbors had seen nothing, some speculated wildly, and some empathized deeply with his plight. Each response fueled his resolve, but also heightened his frustration. Finally, he spoke to Mrs. Thompson, an elderly lady who lived 2 doors down. With a gentle smile, she recounted how she'd seen a couple of workers and a truck parked across the street just days before. They had been moving quickly, she said, and seemed quite busy. Mark's mind raced as he questioned her further, piecing together details and trying to figure out who this mysterious couple might have been. With a clearer vision, Mark felt invigorated. The mystery wasn't just about reclaiming his garden. It was about reclaiming his peace and sense of community. The next step was to confront the person or people who had taken it upon themselves to turn his world upside down. It was a daunting task, but he wouldn't shy away. He'd gather all the information he needed and push forward until he found justice for his garden. The sun was setting now, and Mark saw little shadows stretching across his lawn. He stood at the fence, a determined silhouette backlit by the fading daylight. He knew the fight wasn't going to be easy, but he felt a fire within him, a yearning to stand up for what belonged to him. Tomorrow he would start searching for answers. Tomorrow he would begin the battle to reclaim not just his garden, but his sense of home and peace. The upcoming days were sure to be challenging, filled with uncertainty and possibly confrontation, but Mark felt ready. Equipped with coffee, a notepad, and a fierce love for his garden, he was prepared to face whatever came next. It was time to protect the beauty he had built and nurture the relationships within his community. Mark closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and silently vowed to fight for his garden with everything he had, knowing in his heart that every flower, every tomato plant deserved a voice, and he would be that voice. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark inhaled deeply, his heart racing as he strode toward Carl's house. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the neighborhood, but Mark barely noticed. He was focused on finding answers and reclaiming his garden, the place he had lovingly tended for so long. Each step through the crisp grass brought him closer to confrontation, and the adrenaline surged within him as he approached Carl's porch. Mark knocked sharply on the door, tapping his foot impatiently as he waited. Carl answered promptly, a puzzled expression crossing his face. "Mark, what's up?" he said, leaning casually against the doorframe, his posture exuding indifference. "Can we talk, Carl?" Mark replied, keeping his tone steady despite the swirling frustrations inside him. "It's about the new fence." Carl's eyebrows raised questioningly. "The fence? What about it? Did you know about it?" Mark inquired, trying to pierce through Carl's nonchalance. "Did you approve it too?" A cocky smile crept across Carl's face. "Of course. The HOA decided to approve it for clearer property boundaries. It's necessary," he stated as though this was a foregone conclusion, an impasse Mark had to respect. "Necessary? For whom?" Mark challenged, his voice rising slightly. "It just appeared out of nowhere and cut right through my garden. You know how much work I've put into that space, Carl?" Carl shrugged, seemingly unfazed by Mark's agitation. "Look, Mark, it's for the benefit of the whole neighborhood. We're trying to set clear lines so people know where their properties begin and end. You might think it's a big deal now, but it's going to prevent disputes in the future." He waved his hand dismissively as if trying to shoo away Mark's concerns like an annoying fly. Mark felt a surge of anger bubbling inside him. "This is my property we're talking about. I have my whole garden right there, and it's not just some minor inconvenience for me. It's my sanctuary. You can't just let the HOA trample over my rights." "Well, I guess you should have been more proactive before this started," Carl replied, his tone condescending. "The HOA holds meetings where everyone is welcome. You know everyone was informed, right? Maybe you should have been paying better attention." Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. "I didn't receive any notice about this. No letter, no email. If I had known, I would have definitely voiced my concerns." "You could have told me, Carl?" He stepped closer, driven by disbelief. Just how could someone he considered a neighbor be so callous about his hard work? "The HOA makes these decisions for the good of the community, Mark," Carl defended, crossing his arms defiantly. "You act like it was just randomly done without thought. The truth is, there are laws and regulations we all have to abide by. It's not just about you and your garden. But I didn't choose this. You can't ignore how it impacts me." Mark pressed, his voice rising higher, heart pounding. "This isn't just another neighborhood enhancement. It's an encroachment into my life." Carl shrugged again. Maybe you should think about moving if the fence bothers you so much. The neighborhood is evolving and some properties need to adapt. Mark's jaw dropped in disbelief, anger washing over him like a wave. Adapt? Well, it felt absurd to even entertain such thoughts. You can't be serious. All for the sake of some arbitrary boundaries? All because you're too complacent to stand up for what's right? Don't get so worked up, Carl said, rolling his eyes as if dismissing urgent concerns. You're blowing this out of proportion. The fence will be good for everyone in the long run. It felt like a punch to the gut. The disregard, the arrogance. Mark shook his head, feeling incredulous. You may think it's no big deal for you, but what about my time, my effort? This was my sanctuary, and now it feels like I'm being pushed aside. A hint of annoyance flickered across Carl's face. Look, I didn't build the fence. I simply supported the decision of the HOA, which is what any good neighbor should do. It's not about you. It's about everyone having a clear understanding of property lines. Mark took a step back, exasperated. If this is how you feel, you don't understand what it's like to put your heart into something, to cultivate a space that brings joy and peace. And now you just expect me to shrug it off like it's nothing? The conversation hung heavy in the air, tinged with unresolved tension. Mark could feel his hands clenching into fists at his sides, betrayal and anger coursing through him. He had thought Carl was an ally, a neighbor who understood the value of hard work and community. Standing there, deflated at the dismissive attitude before him, he felt the rupture between theory and reality showcase itself vividly. Do you really think you're acting in everyone's best interest? Mark's voice trembled with emotion, frustration pouring out of every syllable. Look at what you've done, what you and the HOA have done to me. Who decided that taking away my space was necessary for neighborhood harmony? Carl's eyes narrowed slightly, his bravado wavering. You're overreacting. It really isn't the end of the world. In a few weeks you'll get used to it. Trust me, I've met my share of people complaining about neighborhood changes, and they always adapt eventually. The dismissiveness struck deep and Mark felt bitterly resentful. Adapt? Like it was that simple? He was losing a piece of himself, a piece he had built from the ground up, and it couldn't be replaced by mere adaptation. I'm going to take this up with the HOA, Mark finally declared, his voice firm and clear. You can let them know I'll be reaching out. I refuse to sit back and let this happen without a fight. Carl crossed his arms, staying unnervingly calm. Do what you need to do, but don't expect me to change my mind or the HOA's decision. They know what's best for the neighborhood and I stand by them. As Mark turned to leave, heart heavy yet ignited by resolve, he looked over his shoulder. This isn't just about a fence, Carl. It's about standing up for what's right. I hope one day you learn that. With that, he walked away, the weight of their argument weighing heavy on his shoulders. He fought against the anger boiling within him and fought to navigate the pain of betrayal. The battle was just beginning, but one thing was clear. He would not back down. He would fight for his garden and he would fight for his right to be heard. The sun sank lower in the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the struggles ahead, but Mark embraced them all, fueled by the knowledge that he had something worth fighting for. Frustrated and filled with resolve, Mark stepped inside his home after the heated encounter with Carl. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the photographs on the walls, the memories of family barbecues and peaceful evenings spent in his beloved garden. These moments, woven into the very fabric of his life, motivated him to take action. His garden was more than just a collection of plants. It was a sanctuary he had nurtured over the years, and he wasn't about to let it be taken away. He made his way to his study, a cozy room brimming with books and papers. With a determined look, he began rummaging through old files, seeking the property deed and survey report from when he first purchased his home. After a little digging, he unearthed a cluttered folder labeled House Documents. Inside, the deed and the survey report sat like treasures waiting to be discovered, vital pieces of evidence that would help him reclaim what was rightfully his. It was time to bring in a professional. Mark spent the next hour scouring the internet for a reliable surveyor. His choice rested on a woman named Virginia, whose glowing reviews painted her as meticulous and knowledgeable. He dialed her number, explained his predicament, and set up an appointment for the next day, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. When the sun rose the following morning, Mark felt a rush of anticipation. Virginia arrived right on time, her tall frame exuding an air of confidence as she greeted him with a warm smile. She wasted no time, flipping through his property deed and survey report before heading outside to assess the situation. As she methodically set up her surveying equipment, Mark watched intently. Virginia was precise in her measurements and calculations, her brow furrowed in concentration. The minutes stretched on, each heartbeat bringing Mark closer to a revelation he hoped would turn the tide in his favor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Virginia paused, a serious look crossing her face. "Mr. Mark, I have some important information." Mark's heart raced in anticipation. "The fence encroaches on your property. It's extending about 5 feet beyond your boundary lines," she confirmed. A wave of vindication washed over Mark, a rush of adrenaline surging through him. He had suspected as much, and now he had tangible proof. The encroachment was real, and it was happening right before his eyes. "Can you provide me with a report detailing this?" Mark asked, his resolve hardening. "Absolutely. I'll prepare a formal report with all the measurements and maps." "You'll have it by the end of the day," Virginia replied, already packing up her equipment but giving him a reassuring smile. As she left, Mark felt invigorated. With the report in hand, he was no longer just a disgruntled homeowner, he was armed with evidence. He envisioned himself standing before the HOA, presenting the undeniable facts that would demand their attention. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, heart racing with anticipation. This was what he had been waiting for. His chance to confront the very organization that had trampled on his rights without a second thought. With the report from Virginia in hand, he felt a sense of power surge inside him. He headed to the kitchen and picked up his phone, dialing the HOA office number, sweat prickling at the back of his neck. The line rang and his heart drummed in his chest. He envisioned his meeting, the stern faces of the HOA board, and how it would feel to challenge their authority. "Hello, HOA office," a voice answered. Mark took a deep breath. "Hi, I'd like to schedule a meeting regarding an urgent issue concerning my property boundaries." "Certainly, when are you available?" Mark felt the rush of boldness as he responded, "I'm available this week." As he finalized the details, anticipation bubbled within him. The fight for his garden was just beginning, but he was ready to reclaim the peace and beauty he had cultivated over the years. With determination pulsating through him, he prepared himself for the confrontation ahead. Mark had become a man on a mission, armed with evidence and a drive to protect what was rightfully his. For every flower he had planted, for every moment spent tending to his sanctuary, he would not let it be taken away without a battle. With the sunlight streaming through his study, Mark felt a sense of empowerment coursing through him. Virginia's findings had crystallized his cause. He finally had the evidence he needed to fight back. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and determination as he began to prepare his case. First, he gathered his notepad, a camera, and his tablet. He meticulously cataloged every inch of his property, keenly focused on documenting the fence that had so audaciously encroached on his land. As he stood outside, the cool breeze ruffling his hair, he began to take photographs, capturing every angle of the fence and the specific boundaries that the HOA had overlooked. "Smile for the camera, you ugly wooden barrier," he muttered, chuckling at his own annoyance as he clicked away, capturing the rebellious structure that had invaded his sanctuary. He climbed onto a stool to get a better angle, ensuring the images showed the encroachment clearly. With each shot, he felt a sense of triumph, knowing that these images could potentially serve as proof in the battle ahead. Next, he switched to video mode, narrating his observations as he walked along the border of his property. "This fence," he began in a serious tone, "is not only illegal, it's a violation of my rights as a homeowner." He highlighted the markers that defined his true property line, gesturing dramatically for emphasis. "I've worked hard for this garden, and I won't let anyone take it from me." Once he returned inside, Mark organized his findings on his tablet. He chronicled the measurements Virginia provided, alongside the photographs and video footage. He wanted every detail to be crystal clear, presenting a well-rounded case that left no room for doubt. Feeling the energy of purpose, he then focused his attention on his email to the HOA. With his fingers hovering over the keyboard, he took a moment to collect his thoughts. He wanted his message to be firm yet professional, asserting his rights without any hint of unnecessary aggression. After several drafts and editing passes, he finally crafted an email that encapsulated his resolve. Subject: Urgent, boundary dispute and request for immediate action. Dear HOA board members / specific contact name. I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to formally address an urgent matter regarding the boundary lines of my property at your address, specifically concerning the fence erected by my neighbor that encroaches on my land by approximately 5 feet. I have recently hired a professional surveyor, Virginia, last name, whose findings confirmed the illegal positioning of the fence. Attached to this email, you will find the surveyor's report and detailed photographic and video evidence supporting my claim. As the homeowner, I must assert my ownership rights and request the immediate removal of the fence that violates these boundaries. It is essential that the HOA takes swift action in remedying the situation, ensuring that all members adhere to the established property lines. I look forward to your prompt response regarding this matter so that we can resolve it amicably and maintain the integrity of our community. Best regards. Mark, last name. Your contact information. With a final glance over the email, Mark pressed send. A flutter of anxiety mixed with exhilaration coursed through him. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. He had stated his case clearly, and now the ball was in the HOA's court. As he leaned back in his chair, Mark reflected on the journey he had embarked upon. He had begun as a frustrated homeowner grappling with the encroachment of his neighbor's fence but had transformed into a determined advocate for his rights. He envisioned the upcoming confrontation with the HOA, mentally rehearsing what he would say. That evening, while tending to his garden, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose as he watered his flowers and checked the growing vegetables. Every sprout reminded him of his dedication and resolve. He had cultivated this piece of paradise through hard work and care, and he refused to let anyone undermine that effort. The next few days felt like an eternity as he waited for a response. Yet during that time he continued preparing. He reached out to neighbors, sharing his situation and gathering support. To his surprise, several expressed solidarity and even offered to join him at the HOA meeting, ready to stand by his side. Mark knew that his fight was about more than just a fence. It was about respect, community, and the sacredness of home. Each step he took was building momentum toward a resolution, and with each passing day he felt closer to reclaiming both his property and his peace of mind. The stage was set for a confrontation, and Mark was ready to rise to the occasion. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived, and Mark felt a mix of nerves and determination as he walked into the community center. The bright lights flickered overhead, casting a warm glow across the assembly of neighbors, each one settled into folding chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the board. Familiar faces greeted him with nods of acknowledgement and supportive smiles, but it was the air of tension that truly set the stage. Mark found his seat among the other homeowners, his heart thumping in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. A sense of camaraderie buoyed him, especially as he caught sight of Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Ramirez, two neighbors who had volunteered to speak on his behalf. Their presence solidified his confidence, reinforcing the notion that he was not just a lone crusader but part of a community rallying together. As the meeting commenced, the board members, clad in formal attire, shuffled papers and exchanged glances before acknowledging the gathering of homeowners. The president of the board, a stern-looking woman named Linda, called the meeting to order and opened the floor to new business. It was time for Mark's moment to shine. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'd like to address an urgent issue concerning property boundaries, Mark began, his voice steady despite the quickening cadence of his heart. He could feel the eyes of the board upon him, scrutinizing and waiting. With a deep breath, he began recounting his discovery of the encroaching fence. He spoke of the surveyor's findings, highlighting Virginia's report and the implications of the illegal structure. As he pulled out the photographs and evidence he had so carefully compiled, murmurs rippled through the audience. One thing I want to make clear, this is not simply about a fence, it's about respecting property rights, he stated, projecting his voice with a clarity he did not know he possessed. He flashed the images on a screen behind him, showcasing both the encroachment and the established property boundary. As he concluded his presentation, a wave of applause erupted from the crowd, a testament to the resonance of his words. Encouraged, Mark looked around. He caught Mr. Ramirez's eye, who gave him a thumbs up, and he felt a swell of pride. But then a familiar voice broke through the excitement. Carl, sitting across the room, rose to his feet, annoyance evident on his face, a stark contrast to the solidarity Mark had just witnessed. With all due respect, I think we should consider that the HOA was simply looking out for the community's overall appeal. This isn't a unilateral decision. We have to think about the aesthetics of our neighborhood, Carl declared, a self-righteous edge to his tone. Mark felt a flash of frustration but prepared himself. Carl had tried to overshadow his concerns before, but this time would be different. Mr. Carl, it may have seemed like a decision in the community's interest at first, but it fundamentally violates property rights, and any aesthetic concerns are trumped by legality, Mark countered, finding strength in the backing of his neighbors. We all want a beautiful neighborhood, but not at the cost of trespassing on someone else's property. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. Linda cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the meeting. We appreciate your comments, Mr. Mark. The board agrees this is a serious issue that requires investigation. We will need to affirm property lines and review our regulations before making any decisions, she announced, leading the discussion into procedural territory. Imbued with a sense of victory despite the uncertainty lingering in the air, Mark sat back down, allowing a satisfied smile to crack upon his face. The board's agreement to investigate felt like a win, a small yet significant step toward reclaiming his space. As the meeting continued, several homeowners spoke up, echoing their support for Mark's cause. He's not just fighting for himself, he's fighting for all of us, Mrs. Thompson proclaimed passionately. Even as Carl scowled, growing visibly rattled by the unity demonstrated by homeowners, Mark felt that the tide was turning, giving him hope that he was not alone in this battle. Once the meeting adjourned and the homeowners began to disperse, Mark felt lighter, buoyed by the warm exchange of words as neighbors approached him, congratulating him on his presentation. "Don't let Carl get to you," Mr. Ramirez said, clapping Mark on the back. "You did great. This isn't over yet, but we're all here for you." Mark nodded, appreciation booming inside him as he surveyed the faces of the community gathered around him. They had stood united, and in that moment he realized that the fight for property rights might become a catalyst for something greater, the rekindling of community spirit when standing up for what was right. Though uncertainty lingered over the outcome, he felt a robust sense of purpose propelling him forward. The investigation would take time and advocacy could be slow, but every step he took was for the garden he loved and the home he cherished. Together, Mark and his neighbors were ready for whatever came next. The days unfolded slowly, but with each passing week, Mark's determination solidified into something more formidable. The HOA had initiated their investigation into the fence, but Mark knew the road to justice was likely to be rocky. Pushed by a sense of urgency and emboldened by the support he had garnered at the meeting, he took it upon himself to rally his neighbors, transforming their silent frustrations into collective action. In the heart of their neighborhood, where children played and the evenings had once been filled with laughter, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Mark decided that it was time not only to address his own grievances but to confront the pervasive influence Carl had on the HOA. He organized a gathering in his backyard, inviting all who had expressed their support. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of orange and purple across the sky, Mark set up chairs in a semicircle under the fragrant blossoms of his garden. Candles flickered on tables, creating a warm ambience, and soon the familiar faces of his neighbors filled the space. They exchanged pleasantries and warm smiles amidst the aroma of homemade snacks Mark had prepared, a gesture of gratitude for their solidarity. Once everyone settled, Mark spoke up, his voice firm yet welcoming. "Thank you all for coming. I know we've all been busy, but I believe this is an important moment for our community. I want to talk about Carl's actions and how they affect us all. Together, we can confront not just the fence issue but the larger problem of Carl's heavy-handed tactics." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Mr. Ramirez stood up to share his own experience. "Just last month, Carl came over and tried to tell me how to maintain my backyard. I've been gardening for over 20 years, but he wanted to impose rules that don't even exist." Mark nodded, encouraging more voices to join in. One by one, neighbors began to share their own grievances, revealing a pattern of bullying tactics Carl had employed long before the fence incident. Mrs. Thompson chimed in. "He approached me about my front lawn's color. Apparently, lavender is too bright for our neighborhood according to him. It's like he thinks he owns the place." Another neighbor, Sarah, added her tale. "He threatened to report me when my dog barked too loud, even after I explained that she was just being protective. After that, I kept my dog below approved volume levels just out of fear." Each story stirred a wave of collective outrage. As laughter mingled with exasperation, Mark noticed how their shared experiences were knitting them closer together. With each tale, the camaraderie in the air grew thicker, igniting a fiery passion that had lain dormant. Feeling the surge of energy, Mark stood tall, aware that he was tapping into something larger than just a battle for his property. We cannot let Carl dictate how we live in our own homes. It's time for us to come together and challenge his power on the board, he declared, the conviction in his voice igniting a visible spark among his neighbors. The group erupted into applause, a chorus of agreement resonating through the garden. They rallied around the idea of creating a united front, not just against the fence but against the systemic bullying that Carl had wielded for so long. Inspired by their newfound solidarity, Mark proposed a plan. What if we petition for new elections in our HOA? If we gather enough support, we can change the board's makeup and reverse the toxic environment Carl has fostered. Excited chatter erupted as neighbors began brainstorming strategies. Mrs. Thompson suggested gathering signatures in the neighborhood to demonstrate widespread support, while Mr. Ramirez offered his technical skills to create a website highlighting their mission. Sarah volunteered to circulate flyers, sharing their stories and inviting others to join the cause. It was an electric moment where ideas flowed and purpose blossomed. As the evening progressed, discussions morphed into chatter filled with hope and determination. Mark felt as if the weight of his battle had shifted. No longer was he a lone wolf, but the leader of a pack eager to reclaim their community. They shared contact information, vowing to meet again in a week. As the night wore on, Mark stepped back, a smile on his face, watching friends transform into advocates. Under the twinkling stars of their tranquil neighborhood, the chaos and tension that had once clouded their closeness started to dissipate. Instead, they were rallying with a singular purpose. In the weeks that followed, energy surged through the community. Neighbors buzzed with excitement over the plans they had set in motion. The petition circulated quickly, gathering signatures both from those present at the gathering and from others who had long remained quiet, silently wishing for change. People from all corners rallied around Mark's cause, united under a banner of solidarity. As they approached the threshold of their goal, enough signatures to call for an emergency HOA meeting, Mark felt the weight of hope settling in his chest. He was ready to stand not only for his own rights but for the rights of every neighbor tired of Carl's heavy-handed rule. Little did they know that together, they would not only reclaim property lines but also redefine the sense of community that had once brought them all together. And as they stood on the cusp of change, Mark understood that the battle ahead would not just be about defending against encroachments but fostering a vibrant, respectful neighborhood where every voice mattered. He was ready to fight, ready to lead, and most importantly, ready to renew the essence of community spirit that had always been at the heart of their homes. The days leading up to the planned gathering buzzed with anticipation. News of Mark's efforts had traveled like wildfire throughout the neighborhood, resonating with homeowners who had felt powerless for too long under Carl's relentless scrutiny. The excitement was palpable, a current of energy surging through the streets, igniting conversations on porches and front lawns. With the date of the informal gathering fast approaching, Mark transformed his backyard into a welcoming space for the community. He strung up colorful lights, creating a cozy atmosphere that encouraged open dialogue. A mix of anticipation and nervousness swirled within him as he prepared to host the evening, aware that the cohesion of the community would hinge on their collective commitment to change. When the night finally came, Mark stepped outside to greet the neighbors. One by one they arrived, bringing with them homemade snacks and warm smiles. Laughter peppered the evening as everyone began to mingle, creating a lively, inviting atmosphere filled with genuine camaraderie. As the sun slipped below the horizon, Mark called the group to gather around a fire pit. The flames danced and crackled, casting flickering shadows across the faces of those gathered. He felt the warmth emanating not just from the fire but from the unity forming before him. "Thank you all for coming," Mark began, his voice steady though filled with emotion. "Tonight is about all of us, our shared experiences and our desire for a community where we feel safe and respected. We're here to have a conversation, to amplify our voices against the heavy-handedness we've faced." Nods of agreement rippled through the crowd, encouraging him as he continued. "We all know Carl's tactics have made our lives difficult, but we're not going to stand for it anymore. Together we can confront him at the next HOA meeting and demand the changes we deserve." A spontaneous round of applause resonated through the gathering. It was electrifying, a turning point that marked a shift from lingering thoughts of frustration to a plan of action. Following Mark's words, a chorus of stories emerged. Each neighbor began sharing their own grievances, recounting moments when Carl had imposed unreasonable standards or dictated how they should live. It was cathartic as memories of frustration and anger spilled out in a supportive environment. Mr. Martinez stood up next, his voice rising above the crackling fire. "It's not just about me or Mark. It's about every single one of us feeling free to express ourselves in our own homes. My garden is my sanctuary, and I won't let Carl dictate what blooms and what doesn't." A wave of support followed, with others chiming in to share similar sentiments about the little restrictions that had grown into significant annoyances. By the time the firewood began to crackle low, they had woven a tapestry of shared experiences that transformed individual accounts into a united narrative. Mark noticed the excitement in the air. It was palpable, growing with each passing minute. He saw determination rooted in the hearts of his neighbors, propelling them to envision a brighter future. Inspiration surged through the gathering as they mapped out their action plan for the upcoming HOA meeting. Together they outlined a strategy. 1. Gathering support. They would circulate a petition not just to recall Carl but also to support Mark for nomination to the HOA board. 2. Collective voice. Each neighbor would prepare a brief statement to share at the meeting, recounting their experiences and advocating for change. 3. Community presence. They would show up in force, every voice counting, aiming to demonstrate that they were no longer silent. The excitement was contagious, filling their spirits with hope and determination. Mark felt his heart swell with pride as he witnessed the undeniable strength in numbers. The gathering illuminated the power an engaged community could wield, and by the night's end, Mark knew they were ready. As they thanked each other for their candor and support, Mark sensed a shift not only in their mission but in their collective identity as a neighborhood. No longer were they just individuals living side by side. They were a group bound by shared hopes and concerns, prepared to put an end to the era of fear and intimidation that had loomed over them. As late evening shadows stretched across yards and the last flickers of the fire illuminated smiling faces, Mark watched as friendships flourished and confident voices rose above the hum of uncertainty. It was a moment of evolution he wouldn't soon forget, a community that had been fractured, now woven tightly together into a single cord of resilience. With the HOA meeting looming, they departed that evening with new resolve, not only to confront Carl but to reclaim their neighborhood spirit, their voices echoing as they noted, "Together we stand, and together we will change the course of our community." Mark drifted to sleep that night filled with renewed hope, dreaming of a vibrant neighborhood governed by respect, cooperation and understanding rather than fear and control. With each heartbeat he recognized the shift, knowing that they were not just confronting Carl, they were building a future where everyone belonged. The fight was just getting started, but this time they wouldn't fight alone. The day of the much-anticipated HOA meeting dawned bright and clear, the sun illuminating the path that Mark and his neighbors would take toward change. Mark felt a mix of nervous energy and excitement as he prepared himself for the gathering. This was it, the moment they had all been building toward. They were ready to confront Carl head-on and reclaim their community. As Mark arrived at the community center, he was taken aback by the sheer number of faces filling the room. The once familiar space now buzzed with a palpable, determined energy. Neighbors, some he had hardly exchanged pleasantries with, sat shoulder to shoulder, creating a united front against the oppressive shadows that had loomed too long over their lives. He spotted familiar faces and friendly nods of encouragement that bolstered his confidence. When the meeting commenced, Mark was surprised to see Carl lounging comfortably at the front, arms crossed, exuding a practiced air of indifference. This was the moment Mark had imagined when he gathered signatures and shared countless stories. He could feel the weight of collective grievances pressing behind him like a fortress. As the board members called the meeting to order, whispers filled the air, punctuated by the occasional nervous laughter. With a deep breath, Mark rose from his seat, ready to share the evidence he and his neighbors had gathered, evidence of Carl's oppressive behavior that had long gone unchecked. "Thank you for convening this meeting," Mark began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm here today not just for myself, but for every neighbor who has felt bullied, diminished, or pressured by Carl's heavy-handed tactics over the years." He stepped forward, producing a collection of documents that outlined incidents of Carl's interference, emails, handwritten notes from neighbors, and even photographs of his neighbors' properties showing the contrast between allowable standards and Carl's unreasonable expectations. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of an oppressive atmosphere that had forced their community into a cycle of compliance and fear. As he placed the documents on the table in front of the board and began sharing testimony, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. One by one, his neighbors stood, filling the room with their own experiences, echoing Mark's sentiments, amplifying their collective voice. Mrs. Thompson, hands trembling slightly, shared how her once vibrant flower garden had become a source of anxiety once Carl threatened to enforce neighborhood aesthetic standards. "I love cultivating my garden, but after facing constant scrutiny, I've started to worry about simply enjoying what I love," she lamented. Her voice wavered, but the crowd murmured support, encouraging her as she continued. Mr. Ramirez shared an eye-opening experience in which Carl had summoned him over an innocent birthday gathering for his child, deeming laughter too loud and disturbing to his neighbors. "We are a community. We should celebrate each other, not stifle joy." With each story, the narrative of Carl's oppressive behavior grew stronger, exposing the repeated ways he had overstepped boundaries and asserted control over innocent pleasures. Like dominoes falling, each neighbor's story reinforced the weight of their collective grievances, shifting the dynamics of the room. As the tales unfolded, board members exchanged glances, visibly shifted in their perception of the situation. Mark sensed the tide turning. The determined expressions of his neighbors solidified the resolve of the room. It was a spontaneous uprising fueled by a genuine desire for change, and he could see the board members recognizing the shared frustration of the community. When the time came for the board to weigh in, the head member, a gentle-faced woman named Ms. Eldridge, voiced her thoughts. "We appreciate everyone coming forward tonight. It's evident from what we have heard that there's a growing concern regarding the guidelines and how they are enforced. We will review the evidence presented and evaluate our policies. It is our duty to ensure every member of this community feels valued and respected." A ripple of applause erupted and Mark's heart soared. The board's commitment to review their practices signified a monumental shift, a newfound understanding of the importance of community involvement. They were no longer a passive body, they were being forced to listen to those they had allowed to be marginalized. Carl, attempting to regain control, interjected with a defensive tone. "I only acted in the best interest of the neighborhood," he blustered, but his voice was drowned out by murmurs of discontent rising from the disgruntled neighbors. The atmosphere had turned, the room embraced their newfound strength. "By best interest, you mean your interest," someone shouted from the back, igniting laughter that echoed around the room. Mark felt the momentum buoy him as he watched Carl's discomfort betray him. The facade of power he'd worn for so long began to crack as he scrambled to regain his footing, surrounded by discontented neighbors. As the meeting adjourned, Mark felt a surge of elation flood through him. This was not just a victory for their small gathering. It represented a shift in the whole dynamic of the community. Mark had not only stood up for himself but had ignited a fire within his neighbors, rallying them toward a common cause. Together they had faced down Carl's reign of intimidation and for the first time in years, made undeniable progress. As they left the community center, neighbors exchanged grateful smiles and hopeful assurances for a better future. Mark couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of their journey. With each step, they moved forward into a new chapter of their neighborhood, one characterized by voice, respect, and true community spirit. The stakes were real and the fight was just beginning. But together, they had turned the tides, and Mark felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had both challenged and strengthened them. The path ahead may have been uncertain, but so long as they stood united, they were prepared to shape the future of their community, one act of courage at a time. The days following the HOA meeting were a blur of hope and tension in the community. Mark, fueled by the momentum they had generated, spent his evening strategizing with neighbors, but unease began to creep back as whispers floated through the air like storm clouds gathering over the horizon. Carl was not one to back down easily, and those who knew him well braced for a counterattack. The first warning came from Mrs. Johnson, a retired teacher who often had her ear to the ground. She cornered Mark at the local coffee shop, her eyes wide with concern. "I overheard Carl discussing the board's decision with a few members at the park. He was not happy, Mark. He's planning something, and I wouldn't put it past him to twist their arms or bargain with them to reverse that agreement about his fence." The rumors unsettled Mark, stirring a cocktail of anxiety and determination deep within him. He knew all too well how Carl operated, through intimidation and manipulation. As he sipped his coffee, he wondered whether he'd have to gear up for round two. His resolve hardened. Whatever it took, he would not allow Carl to undermine the progress they had made. Mark sought legal guidance to navigate the swirling uncertainties that threatened their newfound unity. He reached out to a local attorney specializing in homeowner association disputes, a woman named Clara who had a reputation for standing firm against aggressive tactics. As he sat across from her in her office, surrounded by books filled with law and precedent, he felt the bitterness of the fight ahead weigh on his heart. "From what you've described, it sounds like Carl may be attempting to breach the agreement made by the board at the last meeting," Clara said, tapping her fingers against a stack of documents. "If we can formalize your claims and collect more evidence, we could present a case that contradicts Carl's intentions and possibly strengthen your position against him." Mark nodded, eager to lift the veil of uncertainty shrouding their community, but he understood legal battles could often stretch out over weeks, even months. "I just worry that he might use his influence to undermine the board's commitment to resolution," he said, his brow furrowing. "Then we need to be proactive. Gather your neighbors and document any responses or denial of the original agreement from Carl or the board members." Clara leaned in, her voice steady and reassuring. "The more voices we have, the stronger your foundation when it comes time to confront Carl or the board if it arises." With newfound clarity, Mark left the attorney's office determined to rally his neighbors once more, encouraging them to keep communication flowing. He organized another informal meeting in his backyard, where chairs and blankets formed a makeshift gathering spot as they came together under the warmth of fairy lights and shared laughter. That evening, tensions ran high, but the sense of community bolstered Mark's spirit. He recounted his conversation with Clara, and they discussed next steps while formulating a plan for gathering evidence against Carl's influence. Handwritten notes from meetings, testimonies that highlighted Carl's attempts to sway opinions, and any documentation of opposing voices that had been stifled by his tactics. "I can already see him trying to bend the board's will," Mrs. Thompson said, worry etched on her face. "If Carl thinks he can intimidate them, he'll play on their fears of conflict, like he tried with my garden." "But we know what he's done," Mr. Ramirez interjected, conviction coloring his tone. "And if we stand together, he can't tear us apart. We have the strength of the community to back us up." Mark felt a spark of hope rekindled with every passing word, the group transforming their fears into tools for fighting back. They brainstormed ways to show the board that Carl's actions were counterproductive, emphasizing the value of community engagement over dictatorial rules. If anything, they had the potential to frame Carl's behavior as toxic to the neighborhood's well-being. As the evening wore on, Mark asked the group to help compile various stories into a comprehensive document, an official account of concerns. Each family could contribute their own experiences, a testament to the growing unrest under Carl's oppressive rule. With enough signatures and testimonies, they could present a united front to the board. The next few days saw the neighborhood rallying with new purpose. Mark created a shared online document, where families contributed their thoughts, recording incidences and gathering signatures. Together they pored over records of the community guidelines, establishing a clear narrative of Carl's mismanagement. As rumors persisted, Mark committed himself to staying vigilant, touching base with neighbors and working closely with Clara to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. When he sensed doubt creeping into conversations, he reminded everyone of their newfound strength, of the power in their voices and shared experiences. On the eve of the monthly board meeting, anticipation knotted in Mark's stomach. They all knew the stakes. It wasn't just about Carl and his fence, it was about the future of their neighborhood. They had charged toward change with open hearts, but they felt the looming specter of doubt as they braced for the fight ahead. That night, Mark couldn't sleep as thoughts danced in his mind. He stared out the window into the darkness, envisioning what awaited them at the meeting. They were on the precipice of change, and though the unknown loomed ahead, he knew with every fiber of his being that they could face Carl together. Tomorrow would host a collision of wills, and amidst the uncertainty, the heart of the community thrummed with belief. Together they could challenge the past and reclaim their future. The sun rose slowly over the neighborhood, casting soft rays that kissed the dew-kissed grass. Mark awoke with a sense of determination, knowing that today marked a pivotal chapter in their fight against Carl's suffocating dominance. But as he stretched and glanced out the window, the sound of heavy machinery suddenly broke the calm of the morning. His heart raced as he rushed to the window, squinting against the sun. A crew of workers was in his backyard, heavy-duty equipment humming as they dismantled the invasive fence that had claimed their shared space for far too long. With each clang of metal and rumble of machinery, Mark felt the weight of isolation ease from his shoulders, replaced by an overwhelming wave of vindication. He hurriedly dressed and stepped outside, the cool morning air invigorating him as he approached the crew. Mark was greeted by a foreman, a jovial man in a hard hat with a smile that seemed to reflect the morning sun itself. "Everything all right, buddy? Just here to do the work ordered by the HO." The foreman's words sent a thrill down Mark's spine. "You're here to take down Carl's fence?" he asked, a mix of disbelief and joy coloring his voice. "Yup. Got the green light from the board," the foreman replied, thumbing through a clipboard. "Seems like they finally decided to listen to the community concerns. You know how it is." Mark felt a rush of warmth spread through him. After weeks of tireless advocacy, documenting stories, gathering signatures and rallying neighbors, their voices had broken through the deafening walls Carl had built around them. His heart soared as he watched the men efficiently work their way through the posts and planks, every shudder of the machinery echoing a promise of freedom. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual sounds of construction and laughter. Grinning and wide-eyed, they gathered to witness the dismantling of what had long been a symbol of Carl's oppressive reach. Mrs. Thompson, her face lit by a gleeful smile, turned to Mark. "Can you believe it? It's finally happening. He won't know what hit him." Mark nodded, unable to find words, his heart swelling at the sight of his community uniting over shared triumph. They had fought tooth and nail for this moment, a physical manifestation of their resilience. As the crew sawed and pulled down the last remnants of wood, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter replaced the tension, familiar faces igniting a sense of camaraderie. As the workers removed the final sections of the fence, Mark stepped forward to examine the yard that had long felt confined. The sun flooded in, illuminating the expanse of green beyond, the shared spaces he and his neighbors often envisioned, now free to breathe and thrive. Without the fence, he could see Mrs. Johnson's garden bursting with blooms, and toward the left, a gentle path that led to the park where memories had been made. The muted barriers vanished, and with them, the lingering oppression that had pervaded their lives. With the sound of triumphant cheers from the crowd, Mark spoke up, raising his voice above the machinery. "This is our community. We are the ones who define how we live together, not a single person who seeks to impose rules upon us. Let today be a reminder that when we stand united, we can defy any obstacle." His words resonated through the crowd like ripples on still water, echoing their unmistakable bond. Each neighbor nodded, and cheers erupted in agreement. The heaviness that had lingered in their hearts transitioned into laughter and celebration, sweeping through the group. The foreman stepped back from the machinery, wiping his brow. "All right, folks. The fence is officially down," he declared. With that proclamation, the crowd erupted into applause, celebrating not just the removal of the wood but a physical marker of change, the dismantling of the barriers that had kept them apart. Mark looked into the faces of his neighbors, radiant with joy and relief. They exchanged hugs, some even wiping away tears. It was more than the fence. It was a turning point in a transformation that hadn't merely occurred in their yards. It was seismic, an awakening that would resound throughout their community long after the last segment had been lowered to the ground. As the crew finished their work, Mark took a moment to revel in the beauty of the morning. He stood at the edge of his lawn, gazing out at what was once a boundary and now felt boundless. He envisioned gatherings with long tables filled with food, children playing freely, laughter echoing against the backdrop of shared lives. With a renewed sense of peace and purpose, Mark headed inside, pulling out his notebook filled with future plans. Ideas for block parties, community gardens, and other initiatives flooded his mind. Today wasn't just a victory against Carl, it was a celebration of what their neighborhood could become. As dusk settled later that day and the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark felt a sense of closure wash over him, mixed with excitement for what lay ahead. They had dismantled more than just a fence. They had laid the foundation for a vibrant community where every voice was valued, a neighborhood flourishing in unity. The fight against Carl was far from over, but for today they had reclaimed their sense of belonging, their sense of peace, and perhaps more importantly, their belief in the power of togetherness. With a heart brimming with hope, Mark knew they would face whatever came next, not as individuals but as a resilient and unwavering community, prepared to embrace the future on their own terms. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mark gathered with his neighbors on the freshly liberated lawn. The fence had come down, but the conversation at hand transcended the physical structures that had confined them. It was time to examine the very framework of their community, the homeowners association itself. Today we dismantled more than just wood and nails, Mark began, standing before the gathering, a passion radiating from his voice. We dismantled the division that has lingered for too long, but now we need a plan to ensure that no one person can impose their will on all of us ever again. The air pulsed with excitement, an almost electric energy that marked a shift in their mindset. They had come together as a community under the weight of adversity, and now they sought to turn that energy into a movement. "Let's think critically about our HOA," Mark continued. "For too long, it has become a tool for one individual's agenda. What we need is a structure that is transparent, democratic, and most importantly, inclusive of every voice in our neighborhood." Nods of agreement spread like wildfire through the crowd, a chorus of murmurs underscoring his points. Mrs. Thompson raised her hand, her brow furrowed with concern. "But how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be? Carl still holds a significant position. He won't just back down." "That's why we have to take action," Mark replied firmly. "We need to establish our goals, advocate for changes in the bylaws, and demonstrate to the board that we represent a larger voice than Carl ever could." Mr. Ramirez chimed in from the side. "We could gather a petition. If enough of us show support for change, we can propose a reformation of the board. We could even introduce term limits to prevent anyone from holding too much power." The group buzzed with ideas, brainstorming ways to organize and assert their collective vision. They discussed hosting community gatherings, where every member could articulate their concerns and hopes. Mark suggested outlining clear objectives, such as the creation of an advisory committee, a regular forum for community members to voice their views, and establishing a platform for annual elections to fill board positions. "It's time for us all to step up," Mark urged, feeling the momentum build. "I believe that I can represent our community on the board, but I can't do it alone. If you trust me to carry our collective strength, I will pledge to foster an inclusive atmosphere where everyone's voice resonates." Cheering erupted once more, but it was a cheer rooted in unity, not just individual support. The crowd began to coalesce around the idea of Mark running for the board, of him being the change they sought. There was talk of campaign events, flyers, and community forums to ensure every voice would be heard, marking the start of a new chapter in their grassroots movement. In the following weeks, the community met regularly, each gathering a blend of hope, determination, and hard work. They revisited the HOA's bylaws, dissecting every document to identify ways that Carl's influence could be curtailed. Residents volunteered to canvass their neighbors, fostering engagement and gathering signatures for their petition, building a swell of support around Mark's candidacy. With every whispered conversation over garden fences and friendly encounters at the grocery store, momentum built. They shared stories of their frustrations, dreams of future improvements, and plans for a more vibrant community. The disenfranchised found their voices and rallied around a shared vision of inclusivity and representation. As Mark's launch into his campaign took shape, he became not just a candidate but a symbol of their movement. A few brave souls joined him, eager to run alongside him to establish a balanced board with diverse representation, a move away from Carl's dictatorial grip. The day of the community meeting arrived, and anticipation filled the air as they gathered in the local community center. The space buzzed with energy and optimism, a palpable shift pulsating from the room. Mark took center stage, standing before a diverse audience eager to reclaim their community. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "Today is not just about a vote. It's about our collective power and the opportunity to steer our community toward a new direction. We have the chance to reshape our HOA into a representative body that echoes the voices of every family in this room." As he outlined his vision for a fairer association, emphasis on transparency, and an open-door policy for dialogue, applause erupted from the crowd, punctuating each point he made. Mark spoke of regular community forums where everyone, young or old, newcomer or long-standing resident, could contribute and be acknowledged. "We can set up committees that represent our common interests, be it gardening, safety, community events. We will find common ground, work together, and ensure no one person can unilaterally decide our fate," he declared, drawing cheers from the audience. With enthusiasm coursing through their veins, the community embraced the moment. Conversations sparked into existence, and folks began planning future events to mobilize support and raise awareness about the importance of their collective goals. They envisioned vibrant events such as picnics and potlucks, where ideas and friendships could flourish. Yet, amid that optimism, Mark was acutely aware of the looming challenge of Carl's opposition. However, rather than fearing Carl's reaction, they saw it as a spark for their fire. They felt emboldened by their shared resolve as one by one, voices rose above the old ways of doing things, whispering a promise of change that had begun with the dismantling of the fence. As Mark sat down, the energy in the room reverberated like a drum, each beat reminding them that they were not just individuals, they were part of something larger, a movement seeking justice, fairness, and community spirit. Around him, heads nodded, and the flicker of newfound hope ignited by their discussions began to illuminate a path forward. Together, they were not only embarking on the effort to reshape their HOA, they were fostering a sense of belonging, pride, and passion. United in their mission to dismantle the echoes of Carl's reign and build a community driven by cooperation and common purpose, they were stepping boldly into their new direction, a future where every voice would be heard, every heart would be nurtured, and love for the community would flourish unfettered. And little did they know, the best was yet to come. The day of the HOA election dawned bright and hopeful, the crisp air charged with the promise of change. Mark stood at the entrance of the community center, clipboard in hand, greeting neighbors as they arrived. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and determination. After weeks of campaigning, fostering dialogue, and rallying community support, the moment had come. When the final votes were tallied, the flood of adrenaline propelled Mark's heart into a rapid race. He nervously glanced toward the makeshift podium where community members awaited the results. The foreman from the last meeting stepped forward, confidence radiating from him as he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. It's my honor to announce the results of the election. With overwhelming support from this incredible community, I am pleased to declare Mark Weston a new member of the HOA board." Cheers erupted, filling the room with jubilation that felt like pure melody to Mark's ears. Friends and neighbors rushed forward, clapping him on the back, their excitement palpable. The relief washed over him like a warm wave, and in that moment, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. As the weeks unfolded, Mark embraced his role, diving headlong into policy changes with the blood of a newly energized community behind him. His first goal was to establish a clear communication process. He launched a monthly newsletter directly addressing questions, concerns, and updates, ensuring that every resident felt informed. Alongside a new user-friendly website with access to meeting minutes and open forums, he emphasized transparency like never before. Transparency is not just a policy, it's a promise, he would often remind the board during their meetings. We are here to serve the community, not to govern in secrecy. Slowly, the atmosphere in the neighborhood transformed. Residents engaged more frequently, their newfound trust in the board leading to a surge in participation. The monthly community forums he organized buzzed with voices that had once been hidden behind uncertainty and fear. Neighbors shared ideas, concerns, hopes, and dreams, often discussing community-driven projects that celebrated their unique contributions. The community garden, once a distant dream, became a reality thanks to collaborative efforts. Children laughed and played there as parents cultivated the soil together, tending to the shared plants that promised vegetables, herbs, and a steady stream of creativity and fun. Little did they know that this small garden became a metaphor for their growth, their unity raising vibrant blooms from the previously shadowed soil, reminding them of the beauty that flourished when nurtured with care. With every successful endeavor, Mark felt the roots of community spirit dig deeper into the hearts of his neighbors. Summer block parties were launched with food trucks, face painting, and games for children, a chance for everyone to come together and mingle, shedding their roles as just neighbors and embracing one another as friends. Yet not everything was smooth sailing. The shadow of Carl lingered, and as board meetings transformed into a tapestry of community involvement, Carl's discontent boiled beneath the surface. He often challenged Mark's initiatives and questioned the new policies, attempting to rally a small faction that longed for the old ways. But Mark found solace in the resilience of his community. "Without accountability we cannot grow," he would retort confidently, inspiring others to echo the sentiment. Having once felt like a lone warrior against Carl's oppressive grip, he now knew he wielded a legion of support. Valuable lessons emerged during this turbulent phase. Mark learned to listen to both applause and dissent, using the feedback to refine their mission. He embraced constructive criticism, turning competition into inspiration. His leadership became one fueled by empathy and collaboration, focused on fostering understanding rather than inciting division. As autumn leaves began to fall and the time for re-evaluation approached, Mark organized a community retreat at the local park, inviting everyone to share their thoughts on progress, areas for improvement, and dreams for the future. Together, they created a vision board, posters filled with ideas written in vibrant colors, showcasing everything from family-friendly movie nights under the stars to establishing a Books in the Park program. Standing among his neighbors, watching the creativity and hope flourish before him, it became clear to Mark that their fight had extended far beyond reclaiming yard space. It was about so much more. They had come together to ignite a sense of belonging. His heart swelled with pride as community bonds flourished, transcending their former divisions. Reflecting on the journey from the day he had stood before the crowd announcing his vision for change, Mark felt a profound shift within himself. What had begun as a rebellion against one man's domination had transformed into a catalyst for reclaiming their sense of identity, a community knitted together, resilient enough to face any challenge. As the evening sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting warm golds and reds over their celebratory picnic, Mark found himself sitting at a table with Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Ramirez, and a handful of children laughing joyfully nearby. He marveled at the transformation of their neighborhood, how each laughter, each shared story, and each new friendship was a reminder that they had forged a path that honored inclusivity and community spirit. "Wow, Mark," Mrs. Thompson said with wonder in her eyes, "look how far we've come. It feels like we've truly become a family." Mark nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "We have. And now we will continue to grow and support one another. I believe this is just the beginning of our new chapter." As the sun set that evening and the stars began to blanket the sky, Mark reveled in their triumph, understanding in his heart that standing up for what is right, not just for himself but for his entire community, was the greatest victory of all. They had dismantled the barriers, and in their place had risen a stronger community, united in purpose and fueled by love for one another. Together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they would thrive.